When analyzing your campaigns for performance patterns, it can sometimes be difficult to identify those patterns just by looking at big tables of data. In a spreadsheet, it's literally just a bunch of numbers that are in black and white text, and it's not really easy to figure out what's going on. Now, a long time ago in my PPC career, I learned a really easy way to make a heat map in Excel with the data in those reports. Now, it might not be the fanciest thing you've ever seen, but it's gotten me out of some jams when I needed to come up with some patterns on the fly, and it's always a reliable way for me to discern some patterns with some specific reports in Google Ads. So today I want to walk you through my process for creating those heat maps in Excel to hopefully get you started down the same path. I'm going to be using data from a live client account for the two examples I'm going to give today. So for a little bit, we'll have to blur out some of the campaign names, but once we hop into the Excel file where we'll be making the heat maps, I'll have all the names anonymized, so nothing will have to be cut out. Let's start with the report that gave me the idea for this video in the first place. The day and hour report in the ad schedule section of the interface. A few weeks ago, we released a video covering day parting, or ad scheduling, whichever you prefer, and how you can use it to your advantage. If you're interested, you can check out that video right here. But the report I'm referencing is going to be down in the ad schedule section on the left. Open that up, and this day and hour report. This is a prime example of what I mean by data just being a bunch of numbers on a screen and hard to look at. Granted, I have about 5 years worth of data included in the report that I've pulled, but you can see here we have almost 2.3 million in spend, 9,700 conversions, and if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, there are 13,000 lines of data to analyze here. That's quite a lot, so it makes sense to try and simplify this process just a bit. So all I need to do here is download this report. I'm just going to choose Excel CSV. Now that we have all of our data in this one place, we need to start putting it in a format where we can actually start to use it and see some of those heat maps. I'll give the precursor that I've given on some of these videos before where we use Excel. Some of you might be much better Excel wizards than I am. I'll almost guarantee it. You'll probably find easier ways to do this, but this is the way I learned how to do it about 10 years ago. Still works for me, and it's what I'm fastest at. If you have a better way of doing this that you are faster at, go for it. Happy for you to save some time. But for this video, we're going to do it my way, because I'm the one who's behind the microphone. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up to Insert, and I'm going to insert a pivot table. Happy for it to be in a new worksheet. And now we have a working pivot table of all of the data that's on the other tab. So the first thing I want to do is start to set up some pretty basic functions here. Let's get day of the week on the top columns line, and then let's put hour of the day on the rows section. And now we have effectively just a grid that shows all the performance for Sunday through Saturday and all the different hours of the day. We can pretty easily just see where most of our clicks are coming from by adding this here. And now it's taken the sum of all the clicks in the other report and added them here so you can easily see where most of your clicks are coming from. Now the part that turns this into a heat map is using some conditional formatting. So what I'm going to do right in the pivot table is highlight Sunday at 12 midnight and come all the way down to Saturday at 11 p.m. I'm leaving the grand total row out. You can remove the row if you want to. Just seems like an extra step for me. And then I'm going to go back to the Home tab, find Conditional Formatting, and I'm going to use color scales. Typically, we like to see lots of clicks, so I'm going to choose the color scale where green is higher and red is lower, but whichever one of these different color metrics makes the most sense for you, you can do that. This one has yellow in the middle of that. This one has white in the middle. Let's go ahead and just leave it white. And now we have a heat map showing where the majority of our clicks are coming from based on a day of the week and hour of the day report. This account is a B2B lead generation account, and over time, they have slowly changed all of their campaign settings to where the ads are only running Monday through Friday, starting at about 6 a.m. and turning off at about 10 p.m., which is very easy to see from this table here. Now that might seem like a basic example, and it is, but imagine that you didn't have a handle on what your ad scheduling was, and you were trying to determine where the most clicks were coming from on a regular basis. This is a pretty easy way to see that. You can do the same thing for any other metric, just by clicking back into the pivot table. And let's say we wanted to do this for cost instead. So I'll turn clicks off, add cost into the mix, and now because of the way that Excel works, I will need to highlight this again, do my same conditional formatting, and the cost heat map follows pretty closely to the way that clicks does. But what about a little bit more advanced example? This currently is using one metric, which is pretty easy to pull up. But let's say you actually want to look at cost per conversion rather than just overall cost and clicks. It's not as simple as just adjusting this to be the cost per conversion metric, because if we pull this in, you'll see that it will sum up all of the cost per conversion numbers as a default, and that's not going to be accurate. We're not seeing $6,700 cost per conversions in this account, and there's not really a better default option here. We're not looking for the count, we're not looking for the average, the minimum or maximum. We're not looking for any of these. What we actually need is a custom formula. So rather than using cost per conversion, we actually need to make two tables, one for cost and one for conversions. So let's have this one default to cost. Then what I want to do is go back to my data table, do the same process that I did before to insert a second pivot table. So go up to Insert, Pivot Table. And then rather than choosing a new worksheet, I want this to be all in the same sheet so it's easier to work with. So I'm just going to click Existing Worksheet. I'm going to click this icon here that says that I get to manually select which cell I want this table to start in. So it'll get a little bit smaller. I'll head over to my other data table, and then I'm going to choose K3. That way they will all line up pretty well. Now that I've done that, open this back up, hit OK. And my new data table has populated right here in K3, right alongside my previous pivot table. We already have a table for cost. Now we need to make one for conversions that follows the exact same format. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. And now we have two pivot tables right next to each other with the cost over these different time frames and the conversions over these time frames. And now we need to make a manual table where we can start adding in formulas. The way that I usually do this, quite honestly, is just to copy the data rows that I want in an existing pivot table. So if I just click copy, I'll scroll down a little bit and then I'll paste it over here. And it's important to make sure that you don't capture the grand total rows, either the row or the column, I should say, or the functions up here, because if you do that, you will literally be copying and pasting the pivot table, and it will still be a pivot table. I selected only the rows and columns in the middle because now this is just firm data, and it's not going to be tied to any sort of pivot table. And the way that you know that is because as I'm clicking into any of these fields, there's no pivot table builder over here off on the right. If I were to click back into this one, that pivot table fields section pops right back up. So for now, I'm just going to delete this data. And now I have a working area where I can put cost per conversion. And just to make this clear, we'll go ahead and change this name so we can keep that straight. So now one other piece is we need to start writing formulas based on the data in the two pivot tables above. Unfortunately, you cannot simply click into the fields like you would with any other formula builder. If I hit the equals button to start, normally we would do cost divided by conversions. If I come up here and click cost, you'll see that there's a get pivot table data builder field here, and there's all sorts of things behind it. This can cause lots of problems when you're trying to pull in data from elsewhere. For whatever reason, this does not populate the data the way that you want to. So what you actually should do, rather than clicking on the different fields, is to simply type it in. You can type in equals B5, it'll highlight the cell, divided by L5, because now we are dividing cost in that pivot table by conversions. If I hit enter, there's an error because there's no conversions here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and fix this real quick and put in an if error function. So if there's an error in my formula, I really just want it to say 0, and that'll be just fine. So I do that. Now it shows 0 because there was an error. And then all we need to do is come down here, drag this formula for all these different fields, change the formatting a bit, and now we can add in our heat map. Same thing, conditional formatting, pick your color scales. But in this respect, the higher the cost per conversion, usually the worse performance that indicates. So I'm going to pick one that's flipped, and I'm going to say that green on the bottom is good, and the higher the number goes, should be closer to red. Now we can start to see how our cost per conversions match up here as well. Everything that is in dark green is just a 0 because that's the lowest number that we have in here. But you can see that the green fits into pretty much most of the business hours that we would have seen before, and the red is going to be Sunday, Saturday, early morning hours, and then starts to get in late at night. So although this account has already been set up to follow this type of ad schedule, this type of report would be extremely helpful for you if you're running full speed on Saturday and Sunday and not realizing that your cost per conversions are not very good those days. This type of analysis could be done for your revenue numbers as well. Maybe you find that for whatever reason, you see really strong revenue performance in the last 5 hours of the day, but not as much around lunchtime. You can adjust for that in your ad scheduling. So just by building a couple pivot tables and making a little basic heat map, you can easily see where you're starting to see better performance and where you're not quite as efficient. But ad scheduling and the hour of the day, day of the week is just one way of looking at this. You'll remember that I had a really long date range selected when we pulled this data, and that's because of the second report that I want to run through. I'm not going to show how I built this report just because I don't want to have to blur it out, but effectively I used the reports section in the Google Ads interface. If you don't know where that is or what it can do, you can check out the video at the top of the screen right now. I customized my columns and I made sure to include month, which would also include the year that's associated with it as well. So for this report, I'm not looking at day of the week or hour of the day. I'm actually looking at months over the course of the last 5 years. What type of seasonality can we see in our campaigns, if any, and how can we lean into that? So I'm going to get started by doing the same thing, creating a pivot table based on the data in this tab, insert, pivot table, create a new tab. And now I can start to build my timeline report. What's best for me is if the rows are the year and if the columns are the month. And here, I don't know if this happens on a PC, but it certainly does on a Mac. If you have a time range value that has lots of different data points, like I have 5 years worth of months, which means that I have a number of quarters and those 5 years, Excel is going to default by adding these on here. All you have to do to get rid of them is just drag them back up and get them out of there. So now we can see very easily January through December, 2018 through 2023. We can do the same thing here of trying to understand when we have maybe the most conversions with these campaigns. Pretty simple heat map. Just highlight all of this, change my conditional formatting. Again, higher is better. And there might not be a ton here, other than the fact that we see that we didn't have very many conversions in 2020. But then as we get into 2021, some of 2022, things are coming back a little bit. But this might not be telling the whole story because obviously 2020 was a bit of a crazy year. So maybe I want to see not only how my conversions were, but maybe my cost as well. So let's take conversions off of here and see if cost kind of matches up, similar to what we just saw for conversions. Same type of thing here. We do see a little bit of a decrease as we get into 2020. But you'll remember in 2021, we actually saw a little bit of a rebound in conversions, but here it's showing that our cost was lower. It makes me wonder if there are any patterns in the type of campaign that we used. So here, I'm going to come back over and click campaign and add it to filter, because again, I have anonymized this data. So maybe we look and see how our brand campaign performed. What's it look like with just brand campaign spend? Definitely a big decrease in 2021 and the beginning of 2022. Things are a little bit lower than they were. We can see the same for our non-brand campaign, or highlight just both to leave it as search altogether. And similar to the last report, maybe one metric isn't enough. So maybe we come in and we create a second pivot table, which give me just a second and I'll have that set up. And now we have the cost and conversions associated for the brand and non-brand search campaigns. But again, maybe this isn't quite taking us exactly where we want to go. So let's go ahead and create that secondary table that's just based on manual formulas. Again, I'm just going to copy and paste the portion that is not dynamic here. I'm going to delete everything in the middle. Write my own formula for cost divided by conversions, which is B5 divided by B17. We'll add in the if error just to make sure. And now we can see a heat map version of our cost per conversion over the past few years. One of the beauties of making this report on your own is that I don't actually want these zeros to be the dark green. It just so happens that it's part of the table. So all I have to do is delete these. And now the color scale adjusts just a little bit so that the darkest green is going to be based on the actual lowest cost per conversion. So the takeaways I have from here are that over the past couple of years, 2021 and 2022, cost per conversion starts to get pretty good in April and carries all the way through kind of the October-November stage. But so far this year, everything is quite a bit higher. That could just be due to a big increase in cost and lower efficiency, but this is why it's helpful to have some context. In this account, we actually decided that a $400 cost per conversion was acceptable. So although these numbers down here all look really good, the performance down here is not bad. It's well within line of what we need, but it also means that we were able to scale up spend this far because we were still hitting the numbers that we needed to see. But it's also useful to keep in mind this seasonality between April and October, because if you are going to try and get good performance out of your campaigns, historically, except for 2020, these are the months where things are a bit more efficient than they are in, say, January. at least for brand and non-brand search. If we wanted to narrow it down to just non-brand, we would need to adjust the filters for both of these pivot tables. So I'll just come here, remove brand. It's going to change the formatting a bit. I'll do the same here, remove brand. And now we can see performance for non-brand campaigns. So again, center of the year, cost per conversion looks really good. Toward the end and at the very beginning, not quite as strong. So maybe this is a good time to start to crank things up if we're seeing good performance and we want to make sure that we hit the goal numbers that we have for the year. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very rudimentary way to make a heat map. And although the examples I've given you today might not be the biggest breakthroughs in the account, it's really helpful to have a quick visual view of how performance is trending. Both of the examples I gave today are based on time. The first was either the hours of the day or days of the week, which could influence what your ad scheduling for your campaigns are, or it was based on a longer time frame over the course of months and years, which could impact your seasonality discussions and understanding when is the right time of the year to push budgets a little bit harder, when is the time to pull back, and how that feeds into your overall annual goals. But there are lots of different types of reports you can do that don't have anything to do with time. You could also be trying to look at what ad formats are driving the highest number of conversions or the best cost per conversion. Maybe you're analyzing different types of keywords, whether they're problem-based, solution-based, as we've shown here, brand versus non-brand, and understanding how those work together. Effectively, whatever type of report you can build that has two different variables, like the one you have on the screen has year and month, but if you had keyword and match type or ad format and message, whatever you can find that has two variables like that, you can put into a heat map and start to analyze all of these different stats to have a visual representation of where things are performing well and where they're not. I'd love to hear any other examples you have of where you've used heat maps to try and understand performance in your accounts, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that I didn't address in this video. So if you have any of those questions or any suggestions for additional reports, please feel free to leave us a note in the comments below. Thanks for watching our video. We really appreciate it. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up below. If you really liked it, maybe think about subscribing to the Paid Media Pros YouTube channel and you'll get alerted every time a new video drops.
If you really liked it, you can help support the channel by checking out some of the t-shirts that we're wearing on our merch shelf, as well as looking at the Super Thanks button.